Reuters video journalist Issam Abdallah was killed on Friday, October 13th, when a shell hit him while he was filming cross-border fire between Israel and Lebanon.
С едой. Свистит.
I'm trying to explain the situation, but I don't know what to say exactly.
The loss of thousands of local newspapers across the country is depriving communities of some of the glue that holds them together.
Being divisive for the sake of being divisive is not what we endeavor to do. It's not what our focus is. It's not helpful to the audience.
Just as Edward R. Murrow and so many others before us did, because we believe in the work, in the mission, and the brand that is CBS News. We share a common goal of journalistic excellence, integrity, truth, and service.
We have to, as a news brand, add value here. You know, it's not in any way our focus, our effort, our directive to divide, to create false equivalencies.
Reporting on world events with accuracy, integrity, independence, and freedom from bias is core to what we stand for at Reuters. And it is critically important for our journalists to be able to do so safely.
Good afternoon. I'm Sally Busby, the executive editor of The Washington Post, and I'm so thrilled to be joined here today by three formidable leaders at the top of the news industry. Let me introduce them briefly. Alessandra Galloni, who is the chief editor of Reuters, Ingrid Ciprian-Matthews, who is the president of CBS News, and Rashida Jones, who is the president of MSNBC. Thank you all for joining us here today. I wanted to start this panel just with some questions about the wars, which are dominating, obviously, and roiling the world as we sit here today. Alessandra, I wonder if I could start with you. Overseeing reporters in a war zone is obviously one of the toughest tasks of people in our positions. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that you recently asked the government of Israel to investigate the death of one of Reuters' video journalists who was killed on the border in Lebanon. Can you talk a little bit about how that sense of responsibility of being responsible for the safety of journalists is, and how you approach that as a leader?
Yeah, so thank you for having me here, Sally. Well, first of all, I will say that I put out that video after Issam Abdallah's death, and my daughter, 13-year-old daughter, happened to see that video, and her first remark was, "Mom, we have to do something about those wrinkles." In this case, she said, in this case, the wrinkles work. Bear in mind, I had not slept for 10 days. And this one, but otherwise we need to do something about it. So nothing like the voice of a child to sort of bring you back to reality. But look, it is, I mean, the death of Issam was terrible. You know, he was in southern part of Lebanon. This was quite early. This was, you know, on the 13th, and he was covering crossfire between Israel and Lebanon, and a shell hit him. And the shell, according to eyewitnesses, was coming from the direction of Israel, which is why then I put out that video asking for sort of a full and thorough investigation into what happened. Of course, we are doing our own, which is ongoing, because we want to understand exactly what happened. We feel we owe it, you know, to the family, to our bureau, which has obviously been very affected, and to the whole newsroom. Having people in war zones is really difficult. It keeps me up at night all the time. You know, we have around 50 people in Ukraine, and we have currently 9 reporters in Gaza who, you know, nothing goes in, nothing goes out. So they're there until we're able to take them out. And it is in, you know, we're in a situation in which it is very hard to keep them safe, because of course we can't send in safety advisors either. It is, you know, we have very, very strong and strict security protocols, and we're constantly updating them, but we did a major overhaul over the last 18 months. And, we are very, very careful about where we send people because we have so many people on the front lines. We are careful about evaluating the risk against the news value. If this is something that's really important for the world to know, then, to a certain extent, we will allow, a little bit more than we would if this is why are we doing this? Why would we put somebody in danger if it's not so important? And also, we're very careful about documenting it. But, being in kinetic situation is not risk-free. And, tragically, situations like this happen, and they're just awful.
Yeah. Ingrid, you obviously have a history of international coverage, CBS and CNN before that, and you have talked about the responsibility to have journalists on the ground, the mission of having journalists on the ground. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you think that has changed over the years? So many people in the conflicts that we're experiencing right now get their news from social media, get their news from TikTok. What do you think is the role of a correspondent in a situation like this, whether it's Ukraine or the Gaza-Israel conflict?
I think that the emergence of TikTok, of Instagram, of Facebook, of all the digital and all the online video opportunities, if you will, makes our jobs a little bit more challenging, but even more important. It is vital to have eyes on the ground. It is vital to have journalists on the ground. Everybody with a camera is not a journalist, and I think we all know that. And, reporting and documenting and speaking to people and trying to decipher between fact and fiction, and especially in a conflict of this nature that has such history and nuance, where there is such divisiveness that we have all seen globally, the response to what's happening there. You need people who are disciplined, who are trained, who have that sensibility as journalists, can ask the questions and bring back the story.
Right, just the context and the nuance, the history of the conflicts that they're covering.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. Rashida, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, of what is so noticeable, obviously, in the conflict that is happening right now, the war in Israel and Gaza, is not just this responsibility of keeping the journalists on the ground safe, which of course you also face, having correspondents there, but this is also a story that has so many political reverberations inside the United States. Can you talk a little bit about the complexity of covering something like that, that is both a faraway war and also a very vital and in some cases bitter political issue inside our own country?
No, I think everything we heard both from Alessandra and Ingrid feeds into that. It's the idea of nuance, of being careful with reporting and ensuring anything that we're putting out is fair and accurate. We have a different layer of responsibility in a dynamic and quickly evolving situation like this, where there are times where we've got to not only think about the current state of affairs, but the bigger picture context, and how do we bring those two worlds together? Your point about not only what's happening, it's affecting people not only on the ground, but here in the United States is something that's frankly unique to some of the other conflicts we've covered. And so those are things that we're all taking into consideration, we're all factoring in. I think first and foremost, we want to make sure not only are we giving accurate assessments and information, we want to make sure we're getting it right, but we also want to make sure we're being fair to the totality of the story. And those are some filters we kind of process things through every day.
Can I add just
one
thing
please,
that I think is important, and to what you were saying before, Ingrid, is that keeping people safe right now in newsrooms is, of course, for those of us who have people on the front lines, because that's what we do and that's important to inform the world, but keeping people safe in the newsroom. With the onslaught and the increase in user-generated content, so many of our people in the newsroom are constantly having to process really traumatic visuals. And not only, but in order to identify whether they're correct or not, to verify them, have to really parse them. And that is harrowing. That is very, very hard. And I think there's a new discipline in newsrooms that safety is not just the safety on the ground, but is mental, mental health safety and sort of management of trauma and vicarious trauma.
Yes, no,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
so fascinating.
really
fascinating.
duty of care extends beyond the physical safety. It's about well-being, and it's about well-being for those in the field, and as you just said, those back at home and those watching videos. That sensibility did not exist years ago. And I think there's a realization that not only is it necessary, it's vital as well for the well-being. And by the way, when you think about not only the volume of the kinds of stories that we're covering, but they're coming at us at a rapid pace.
Right.
So there's very little time in between for people to recover. So if you don't pay attention to that in that moment, you're losing an opportunity and risking greater harm.
And can I ask you what are you doing to address that? Training, Rashida, actually,
Training,
super fascinating
we have
topic,
written
obviously.
processes in place to give teams guidance on looking at sensitive images, listening to a piece of content versus looking at it, how often, when you take breaks, what things to look for. Unfortunately, there are teams, for every bit of content that makes it out into the ecosystem, there's a large percentage that we can't even put on the air, but someone's got to look at that stuff. And so we've got written practices. Luckily, one of our social media video teams has a written policy that we've dispersed throughout our entire company to ensure that people are taking care, the utmost care that they can, but also that we're giving people an opportunity and the license to step away from it. These are tough stories to cover, just as an individual, and the trauma that creates. And so that's something that I think, especially in recent years, we've as leaders had to take into consideration, not only the physical danger, not only the emotional danger, the mental danger, and how do we create processes in our organizations to ensure that we're protecting people.
It's really a fascinating topic.
And
yes,
also
please.
that safety is no longer, used to be sort of one size fits all. And so, for example, HET training, for physical safety, was sort of everybody did the same thing. But increasingly, we're realizing that, that different people are affected in different ways in kinetic situations, but also in what they're watching for UGC. So that if you're a woman in a war zone, that is different than being a man in a war zone. If you have had previous experience and you now are fabulous at forensic, looking at videos, but you've had your own trauma, then that is more traumatic than if you haven't. And so real tailor-made safety protocols is something we're working on.
And I assume this is everything from making sure that you have protective gear that fits women's bodies to training for sort of repetitive viewing of terrible video and things like that. We recently had a partnership with DART, I think many of you know, where they came in and are talking to many of our journalists about how to be protective as you're looking at disturbing images and things like this. So this is I wanted to touch briefly on the scourge of disinformation, one of the main challenges facing journalism today. And I think this flows immediately. I was super interested, Ingrid, to see recently that you guys are starting a fact-checking unit. And the information that I read talked about hiring forensic journalists and people who had data visualization skills, other things like that. Can you talk to us, what does that mean? Right? Who are you looking for? What sort of skill sets?
I think you described it appropriately. Think about a forensics team, right? Because the need is there now with the uptick in deep fakes and misinformation and disinformation. We are flooded with video that we really have to decipher whether it is real or imagined or intentionally edited to appear to be something that it is not. So CBS News Confirms is our way of attacking this, if you will, hiring a team of journalists that will include visualization journalism, data journalism, expertise in AI technology, to help us be able to fact check the video, the content that's coming in, but also train other journalists within the organization to be able to do so as well.
That's fascinating. I think many people don't think of journalism as having that sort of skills. We think about people putting microphones in front of, being able to get information from documents, but this whole sort of idea, which is really emerging in our industry, was really fascinated by that. So as we head into a political year, which is certain to be certain
It never
to be
ended and it's already started.
marked marked by disinformation, by name calling, by things that could be much worse than that. Your audience is obviously highly interested in politics. How are you going to approach that this time? We know so much of the recent past history around election denialism, everything, people saying falsehoods, saying lies. How do you approach that to gain trust with the people who are watching you?
Sure. So I think in some ways we have to learn from what we've seen in past cycles, and you know, there are certain characteristics of the previous cycle as far as disinformation, intentional disinformation, systemic processes to infuse the voters in the audience with information that's swaying or leading them in a certain direction, is one piece of it. But so there's some things we can learn and we've picked up from previous elections, but I also think you have to kind of be prepared to write the playbook in real time. You know, we've never covered an election like this one. We've never covered an election where simultaneously we're also covering trials surrounding one of the leading candidates. We've just never done that before. We've never covered an election that had this level of social media influence. These are things that we haven't done before. So I think you kind of have to approach it twofold. One is, what are the things we've seen and learned from years past, from elections past, and then how do we in real time adjust and adapt to what's relevant, what's important right now? You know, I think some of what we've talked about as far as having systems in our newsrooms to ensure that we're vetting information, you know, we all have competitive juices in us, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting on this stage. But I think we all have an appreciation for this idea that sometimes being a little slower and methodical is going to be of better service to the audience. And so that's an element that I think in our newsroom especially we're focused on. What is the right context for a story? Context is key, and for us, rather than, and we even talked about it a little in the video, rather than look for the side or the angle, it's how do we help our audience better understand? I think the world right now is so nuanced, it requires so much context and texture that if our value add and our focus is how do we, instead of bringing you here or here, how do we bring you here and bring you to just kind of a deeper awareness and understanding of the world that's happening, because we're kind of figuring it out as well. We've never seen times like this before.
And so that brings me to a question that I'm going to ask you, but I would be interested in other people weighing in on this too. The actual trust in the industry that we represent, media, is at historic lows. So as we fight disinformation, as we fight misinformation, how do you actually do that if the people who are looking at what we're doing don't trust us? I've always been intrigued by Reuters' effort at transparency. You know, how are we telling these stories? Where are we getting our information from? But how do you actually talk to your staff about that? Like, you know, you're supposed to be on the front lines and saying what's happening in the world, but people are actually not necessarily trusting you. They may have trusted the name of Reuters or the name of the Washington Post in the past, but not so much anymore. So how do you deal with that, actually?
So yes, it's a fundamental question, but actually, if I could add something that actually is segue. I'm not going off topic. I promise.
Please.
You know, it's interesting what you said about, you know, sometimes news organizations have to sort of stand together, you know, and we're all very competitive. So as you may have seen, there was just an incident over the past few days with an organization called Honest Reporting that claimed that a number of news organizations, including Reuters, AP, New York Times, had embedded, or rather raised the question, how could they have pictures so fast if they were not embedded with Hamas during the October 7th attack? And of course, this was completely untrue and also very irresponsible and very dangerous. In fact, it put many of our staff or all these organizations at risk. And all of us, we actually didn't do it together, but the fact that we all did it and came so strongly, you know, and spoke so strongly against this and how irresponsible it was, I think in these moments you have to stand up for the freedom of the press and you have to stand up for truth, you know, together. So I agree with that. But going back to trust, look, it is hard. I'll tell you what we do at Reuters. We feel that our combination of being a very global news organization, but also being very local. I noticed there was a clip about local news, and of course, local news is so important, and we worry about it disappearing. Well, we are local in all the countries where we operate in, which is 200. And so we have local journalists with real deep expertise of their countries and working in their languages. You know, we publish in 16 languages, but we have 150 nationalities. that combination of sort of the real local information plus the globality, if you will, we feel is for us a unique aspect of trust. Now, how do you get people to believe you? We know that to be true, and we work hard at it. And you verify your sources, everything that we know. One of the key things, and again, it has been said before, but it is worth reiterating, is acknowledging when you make mistakes. And that is a really, really important. It is painful to put out a correction, very, very painful, but it is so important to engendering trust. But often not even that is the truth. So it is a constant battle. But I really still believe that when things matter to people, and I think COVID, you and I were on a panel where we talk about this. COVID is actually a really good example. When things matter because it's making a difference about where what you do related to your children, what you do related to your health, people will seek out the facts. So. And you've got to think that everywhere around the world, every topic matters to somebody. So if we can just really be steadfast in that approach and not waver, because inside our own newsrooms, we were talking about it before, there are many aspects, many things that, like this conflict that's going on now, that create tensions. And if you just really keep to the approach of sticking to the facts and trying to get to the truth, I believe it's the right way, even though it's not always simple.
I want to add, because I agree with all of that. I mean, it is using your journalistic skills and applying them, across every story. But I think that being intentional about language, being precise and transparent is so important and goes a long way, because people need to understand what you are saying, and language and words matter more than ever.
Okay, 100%. That's very interesting. So I wanted to move to just a little bit more of a personal note, because it's an extraordinary group of people on the stage. First, in many of your organizations, in a news industry that has not always been necessarily completely friendly to top editors who are women, or top producers who are women, or top presidents who are women. And I wanted to just ask each of you about that. And I know we all probably get a little tired of this question, but it is incredibly relevant, I think. Ingrid, let me start with you. Does it matter to you day to day that you are, the first person who looks like you to head CBS News? Does it matter to your staff? Do you think about it? Do you brush it aside? Does your staff think about it? What does it mean to the women who work for you? How would you talk about that?
I think, honestly, it probably matters to some others more than me. And I think that's because, I will be honest, it took me a minute to realize that I owed it to those that were looking up to, seeing somebody like me in my position, that mattered, and that signified something, that signaled something. 4 decades ago, when I started in this industry, never in a million years would we have seen what we're seeing right now. But, I also, my approach has been, there's an evolution. And I hope that over the years I have learned from whatever hurdles I've faced, and I'm sure both of you have as well, and took some lessons that will inform how I lead. I think there was never a question in my mind that a leader could look like me or could look like you or you. But clearly, we weren't talking about me. We were talking about what the status quo was. And I think the important message there is leaders come in every shape and size. And so many of us are leaders, not because we have a title, and I think that is so key. Leadership is not about a title. A leadership is about reaching out, inspiring, bringing people along, and treating humans with the same amount of respect. I think to a degree, the humanity has been lost over time. And so part of my mission is to put that back in.
That's interesting. Rashida, will you engage on this question?
Yeah, I would say an emphatic yes. It matters to me. It matters to my teams. I think it matters to the industry. When my role was first announced, I didn't even think about the fact that I was the first Black woman to run a major cable news network until it was in a headline. And I was like,
Yeah.
I guess I am. Because I didn't think about it, right? Just because, I guess intellectually I knew it as a fact, but I didn't think about it. And the example I would give you, I remember my daughter, who's 14 now, years ago, I remember her saying, when President Obama was in office, like, Mom, have there been people who weren't black who were president? It's like, well, you come sit right here and let Mommy tell you. But what that meant was, what she saw, it was there, and it was just because, and it was matter of fact. And my hope is one day it doesn't matter. Today it matters, because I think it's important for me to make sure, while that might be the headline for me, that somebody's got the headline behind me, and I've set at least an expectation of excellence, so as people are coming up through the industry, that they see what's possible. And they don't question it, and the industry doesn't question it. And when you see yourself in someone, it becomes more of an attainable goal. And that's something that I carry with me.
Normalizing. Yeah.
Super inspiring. And Alessandra, I think of Reuters as the ultimate sort of like traditional news organization. Do you think that you are the first and last woman top editor of Reuters? Or talk about this.
No. Well, I grew up in the financial journalism. So I'm certainly in financial journalism, business journalism. There really were very few women. But I too, I have to be honest, I didn't think about it either until I saw the headlines, you know. And also, Reuters is such a storied organization. Most of the people we would get sort of as early career, we had this program called the trainee scheme. It was all Oxbridge, so Oxford and Cambridge, you know. And so that's changed now, thankfully. So I too didn't think of it, and I don't think of it every day, but I actually think it's our responsibility to think about it, because it is important to others. And actually, I see a lot of women, but a lot of, you know, earlier career colleagues, you know, a lot of people in the newsroom look to me to make changes that will then allow them to have a chance at whatever, you know, will make them happy. Not everybody, you know, like sort of the corporate ladder, but whatever it is that will make them happy. And one of the things we're trying to do actually is to make Reuters an organization where actually you don't have to do the things that news organizations always did. So a reporter, senior reporter, then a deputy bureau chief or a bureau chief, you know, but that actually you can have a really varied career, both in terms of what you do and in terms of how you're paid, and you know, if in whatever sort of whatever it is that you want to do. So I think it is our responsibility, because people are looking to us to allow them to really fulfill their dreams.
Well, that's just a fascinating set of responses, if I may say so myself. So we are just about out of time. I want to thank all three of you for being here today. This is truly interesting, and I know it's
we should have asked you.
Very busy time. No, I told you. I'm the moderator.
Another amazing woman leader.
The post.
Next time.
It's much the same. I think it matters so much for the people who work for us, perhaps more than it means for us, actually. Yeah. It matters a lot for the people who work for us, and I think that is what we actually have to focus on. So, but now I'm out of my moderator. This is terrible. Undisciplined. Really want to thank the three of you. I know it's an incredibly busy time. It means a lot that you came and spoke to this audience. So thank you so much for all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we exit left.
So up next is Tina Brown, who will be talking about drug cartels in Mexico. Please stay with us. Thank you so much.